I just got done updating a code base from using an older WYSIWYG editor to the Tiptap editor, and I wanted to go over some things that I learned that could be helpful for anyone who's getting started with the Tiptap and is kind of looking for basically a good jumping off point. And I think one of the problems with, it's not really Tiptap specific, it's WYSIWYG editor specific, is like you're just kind of stuck with needing to use a lot of boilerplate because it's not so easy to separate the UI from the functionality, even though they try. It's kind of like the reason that Shad Cyan has become so popular, because it's kind of an inherent problem that you're going to have to basically do your own UI. And so within the Tiptap documentation, they basically introduce each piece of functionality in isolation, and they have these little examples for like how to make like a little bubble menu toolbar and things like that. Like they show you like, here's like this little toolbar here, but like it's really simple, as you can see. Like there's just these like 3 buttons. But then they also have this template, which is a full Next.js project that becomes available to you when you sign up. It's like a protected GitHub repo. And this one, it has like, it's basically everything combined and set up in a way that would actually be useful within a project. You can see that it has like all these drop-down components and all these different blocks that you can add, and all this stuff set up right out of the box. And so it can be a little bit frustrating because it feels like, why can't I just import a component that has all this stuff ready-made, which is the way that some other editors worked in the past. Like one I really liked was a React page. But the problem is that when you ship all that UI code along with your functionality, eventually things are just going to break. Like React page was like amazing for like 2 or 3 years, and then as React was updating and Next.js were updating, like things just started breaking, and it also kind of pinned you down to a single UI style. And so I do think this is better. It's just you need to learn how to import, or basically how to use all this code they provide from the template in your own code base. And so I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. So when you sign up for Tiptap, they give you access to what they call the React templates, which apparently is still in beta. And it's really just a React code base, or actually it's a monorepo of 2 different projects. One's a Next.js project and one's just a simple React project. And the simple one, it's like a really simple editor with a toolbar, and it has basically no styling on it. And we're just going to focus on the Next.js one. And it has some README stuff. So like one thing you have to do is, because it's a protected repo, is you have to add a .npmrc file, which will then have your token in it. You're going to have to copy that in. And this has some implications for if you use like GitHub Actions. You're going to have to create a GitHub action that writes this file before it runs your npm install using like a GitHub secret. And I think I'll show later in the video how to do that. And similarly on whatever, if you're using like vercel or something, like there's usually some method of getting this npmrc file working. In vercel, I think you put the contents of this entire file into a single environment variable, and that works. And there's another way of doing it as well, in case you have multiple different like protected packages. And so the other thing you have to remember to do before you get this template working is you need to run a little script, which basically just it removes like some AI extension stuff, which is like something you need to pay for from the Tiptap company before you can use. And so you can see what it does. All it does is it removes this dependency and some imports and stuff like that. For the most part, that's all you need to do. And then you just run npm install. And then once you have that installed, you just run npm run dev, and then just make sure that the template's actually working. I want to just make sure that all the all the pop-ups and stuff actually work, and whatever this is. And one thing you should probably also do is just check that check what's going on in the console. Button cannot be a descendant. Okay, so these are just warnings. And there's also some complaints about the AI stuff, which is the the extension that we basically disabled by running that script. And so I don't think any of this stuff really matters, but it's good to pay attention to what's going on in here, because basically what we want to do now is we want to modify the code base in a way that it can be then easy to just copy a whole directory into another project. So let's take a look at the code base. It's a mono repo, so it's using this directory templates for the different packages, and we're only concerned with the next project. The other one's just the same simple example from the documentation, more or less, I think, or it might have like a little toolbar or something, but like it doesn't have styling and it doesn't really look all that great. You could use it for like a sanity check if you're having trouble with the NextJS version. And so this is a app router NextJS 14 version, and the route that actually renders the editor is in this this one with the room query parameter. It's just the top level route, and that query parameter is used for like the collaboration tools stuff, but we're not actually really going to use that for anything. We're going to end up disabling it because we're just concerned with the basically getting it rendering, because this is kind of like a first approximation of what you're going to be using. And the good thing is, because we're using this code straight out of the template, you can always just it's basically if you pass like the correct collaboration parameters to one of the hooks, then it'll set everything up for you. And that way, if you don't need it, it's not really that much of a hassle to remove the different imports and stuff like that. You can just comment them out, and then you won't pay any price in terms of size of the bundle at the end of the day. And if you ever need it, you can then pull it back in, and you don't actually have to do that much to get it working again. And yeah, so from this top level route, it's also just doing some dark mode stuff. With dark mode, it's all just toggling basically a class on the top level element. It's not really doing anything more complicated than that. Like there's no context or anything, no React context. And it just worked out of the box for me on my own project, because that's the way that I was doing it on the other code base. And so this is all just dark mode stuff, and I guess it's also reading query params. So if you end up using the page router, you might have to end up changing that. But we're going to ignore that mostly. And then also here we're doing the AI fetching stuff. So this is where those errors were coming from. We're just going to ignore that as well. And then we're logging the stuff out. And you see here that we already have these like components. Basically this code base, like they created their own components for different things that are used within the toolbar. And it uses the same, it's not actually using shadcn, but it's using like some of the same libraries that shadcn uses. So we need to keep that in mind for when we copy over the package dependencies. There might be some version conflicts and things that you might have to debug. For me, everything just kind of worked because it's more or less using the same modern stuff that shadcn was using. And so the thing that we're really concerned with is the block editor component. So the thing about the block editor component is that it expects that it's only going to be rendered a single block editor per page. So you see here that we're importing the CSS for the whole editor, and this includes like some stuff with the different extensions. It's kind of hard-coded in this code base. And another thing is, because it's assuming it's taking up the whole page, is it has a bunch of stuff with like a sidebar, which I suggest just commenting out. One thing that I noticed is that if you want to render two editors on a page, because of the way that their sidebar works along with the table of contents extension, it ends up going into an infinite recursion loop. But if you just either don't render the sidebar, or if you remove the table of contents extension, then that's fixed. And so I guess if you want to use the table of contents extension, you're just going to have to figure out how to basically stop that infinite recursion. I didn't really look too deeply into it because I don't really need it. And another thing to note about this CSS here is, because this is the CSS for the whole editor, when if you ever need to just render the pure HTML from the editor and not the actual editor component, which is something you might want to do if you need to do server-side rendering from the like page router, for example, because the editor has a function called getHTML that returns basically the output of what's in the editor state at that time. What you can do is you can save that HTML, and then render it from HTML, or render it from React just as pure HTML. And then if you also include the styles import, then everything will look as it is within the editor, and you'll get like some bundle size saving when you do it that way. And also you can do server-side rendering that way, because this the TipTap editor does have some issues with doing server-side rendering from the page router, at least on the version that I had. I ended up having to do some extra work to get it doing actual SSR, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, because we're still just looking over the code base. And so, yeah, this is the block editor component. You can see it takes these like collab and AI parameters, but they're optional, so you basically can disable collaboration entirely by just not passing those parameters. And ultimately, I suggest when you end up moving your code base to basically just comment out the sidebar stuff just to get everything working at first. And the actual editor instance comes from this hook, useBlockEditor, and we're going to take a look at that in a second, because that's where the basically the configuration for the whole editor comes from that one hook. And you see here it's also just returning extra stuff that's collaboration specific that you probably want to avoid at first when you're first getting it imported, and then if you ever need it, it's just going to be working out of the box, because we're just going to copy this code and try not to touch it too much. And again, the sidebar, you're going to want to have to comment that out, and the whole thing, because it expects to fill the whole page, it has this Tailwind class to fill the whole thing. But for me, once you comment that out, or just remove that class, it actually ends up working fine as just a normal component. So like from within my own project, I am rendering multiple separate TipTap editors as like form fields within a big form. And so yeah, like don't worry too much about the styles on the thing. Like simply removing a few classes actually gets it working pretty well. And then there's just other stuff in here, like this is like the header of that page. There's nothing in there that's touching anything with the toolbar. So in my project, I ended up just commenting that out. Editor content's the actual TipTap like package component. So this isn't something that we're defining within this project. And all you do is you pass the editor instance that we get from the hook that we're going to take a look at in a second. And then these other things we're rendering are all just built in. Or not built in, they're defined within this project for the different toolbars and things like that. So like the link menu only becomes visible when you're on a link. And like the text menu is like the big menu that comes across the top for editing the different styles of whatever text is selected. And there's different things. I think content item menu, the way they have it working is like to the left of whatever text. Here, let's try and find it. Like this thing here, I think is the content menu item. So it has like, you can delete a block or whatever. And then the way they have it set up is if you want to add a new thing, all it actually does is it like goes to the next line, and then it types in a slash for you for bringing up this pop-up with the different blocks. And so it's actually a pretty simple UI, and as far as I can tell, it works for mobile pretty well. The only thing that I was looking at is it might be better on mobile to have the text toolbar, this thing up here, always visible. And also note this it's looking a little weird because I'm zooming in so much. For the most part, things work pretty well. So let's go back to that code base. Yeah, so within this project itself, like all this menu item stuff, it like comes with a lot of kind of like UI specific components. Like they define their own things, like they call something like a surface, which is just like a background, whatever, and everything's using Tailwind. And they're also using like, I think it's called Radix. It's the same library that ShadCN uses. And so everything's pretty standard looking, and they have everything broken down in folders pretty well for what you have to do. And so I guess let's Oh yeah, the other thing is the extensions. They have a directory for extensions, and they just have everything kind of broken down here. Within the extensions themselves, they for each extension they use, they define their own directory because each one really takes a significant amount of config. And so if you ever want to also modify it, it kind of makes it easier if you can just, if you know there's a single directory that has the code that matters for that extension. And so at first I thought it was kind of obnoxious that they did this, because they basically import everything within its own directory, its own directory and its own file, and they make like these like barrel file type things. But I changed my mind the more I worked with it, because I decided that it was actually a good thing, because it makes it much easier to make modifications to the extensions. Like one thing I had to do was I had to change the how the YouTube extension works so that it works with a start param, start user query param, which is something that it wasn't doing out of the box. And so I guess let's look at the useBlock hook. And here's the useBlock editor hook. Like the other stuff, if you pass null or undefined for the provider and AI doc and all the collaboration stuff, then it'll just be disabled by default. So you don't really have to concern yourself too much with it. You don't have to, like comment stuff out and remove code in order to remove the collaboration stuff. You can just not pass it, at least as an initial, just to get it working. You can remove all that stuff if you want to, save space in your save size of your bundle or whatever. And here's what's actually creating the editor instance, and it's this useEditor function. This is defined by Tiptap. This isn't something that's defined within this code base, within the template, and it just takes the different options that you would expect for the WYSIWYG editor. One interesting one, though, is the immediatelyRender. You need this to be true in order to do server-side rendering, but within the page router with NextJS 13, you have to set this to false. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's kind of a nuisance, and maybe they'll be able to fix it, but there's some workarounds, because I ended up doing it anyway. I did figure out a way to do SSR because the editor has a toHTML function, and it's not like it doesn't work at all with Next.js. You just don't get that initial render, and so you can basically render the HTML and then swap it out with the editor when you need to actually edit it. Or you could also just not render the editor at all, and then you would also save size with your bundle, which is what I ended up doing. And so obviously autofocus, if you want to have multiple editors on your on a single page, you're going to have to set that to false. And one kind of annoying thing with Tiptap is when it doesn't take like an initial content or like default content prop. Instead, everything's done imperatively with these different commands. So basically, like on create, there's a callback, and then you have to manually call this to set the content of the editor. And again, some focus stuff. If you actually wanted to focus it, I would end up commenting that out. And again, this is just like collaboration stuff that you don't really have to worry about. And then a big one is the extensions. ExtensionKit. This is defined within the within this project itself. So this is not a Tiptap function, and that's basically, it just returns an array of all the different extensions that we're going to use after we set them up with a different config and stuff like that. And then again, more provider stuff, AI token stuff we can ignore. Again, user stuff, which is just collaboration stuff that we can ignore. More collaboration stuff, listening on events with the provider. And then here's one thing to take notice of. I think they've added this just for like debugging, so that within the console you can access the editor object and then call those imperative functions. And you can call like editor.getJSON for the whatever the state of the editor is. As far as I can tell, it's not actually, it doesn't depend on this for anything. I was a little bit concerned about that, because obviously if you render two editors on a single page, then you're overwriting this variable, and it's only going to point to one of those editor instances. But yeah, as far as I can tell, this is really just a debugging thing that they added in here. So let's take another look at this ExtensionKit thing. So this is defined within the source extensions directory. And let's see here. So these are just the different Tiptap extensions with their different configuration options. So when you instantiate them, you can like change stuff by calling configure on them. And then starter kit, this is something that is it's defined by Tiptap. I think you can actually look into it. Yeah, so you can see like what's going on within this actual thing, but that's a Tiptap library, kind of a starter set of different extensions. And one thing I noticed is if for some reason they have history disabled, I'm not exactly sure why they did that, but if you just remove this line of code, then you do get like the typical Control-Z functionality that you would expect from an editor. I wonder if they added this maybe because of the collaboration stuff. Maybe it doesn't work with that. I'm not exactly sure. And some of this stuff like code block, it does have a code block. I think they disabled it here because we use a different code block extension. And I think I mentioned earlier that like the configuration for the stuff, it's kind of spread out across different things. So like here you can see that we use like this barrel file. So we're not importing these extensions directly from the Tiptap library, but we kind of intercept it within our own code base. So like, let's see which one that would be good. Like, I don't know. Let's look at code block. So I don't know what's in here. So within code block, like all it's doing is it's importing the typical, it's importing the library extension as is, and then we just add some extra configuration here. And so it's a little weird, I guess, because we're calling configure in different places. Like sometimes it's here and sometimes it's in the ExtensionKit file. But it does make sense because sometimes you really need a lot of code for what's going on within these extensions. Like I mentioned the slash command earlier, I think, which is like when you type slash in the editor and it brings up all the different your different possible extensions that you can add at that point. And so there's like just a lot of code going on in here. Like there's like a prose mirror plugin. Prose mirror is the library that Tiptap's built on. And so there's like all sorts of low level stuff in here. And if you want to I think menu list is where it is. I ended up adding like a couple extensions myself. If you want to add them to the drop down, you have to end up going in here. But none of this stuff matters so much for the moving this into your own project. So I think I got a little bit distracted. So let's just go over real quick what we need to do to basically get this ready to move into our own project. And so to get this moved into another project, it's really pretty simple. All we're going to do is we're going to move all the Tiptap specific stuff, not the NextJS stuff, but the Tiptap stuff into its own folder within this project. And then we're going to make sure that it actually works, that all the imports are working and things like that. Because as it is, there isn't just one thing you can move right here, and there's going to be namespace collisions probably with whatever your own project is, because like we can't just copy in a full components directory, especially because I think they're using the same convention that like shadcn's using. So like component/UI/button, like we need to do something. So let's just create a Tiptap directory, and we're going to have to rely on the renaming functionality of the editor. And I did this I think it was 2 weeks ago, but I was using a different editor, and the fact that this is within a workspace ended up making it so my editor wasn't very good at renaming files. So like when we use this TypeScript alias, like all those end up breaking, or at least it did on VS Code 2 weeks ago. I'm now using a cursor. And so I expect that it's probably not going to work still because cursor is based on VS Code. And so we're also going to have to probably do some search replace, some voodoo just to get that working. But since we didn't modify anything yet, it means that if we can get this, if we can run npm run dev and it doesn't fill with errors, it means that we're on the right track. So I'm just going to move now the components, extensions, hooks, lib, and also styles into the TT directory. So I moved those directories, and at first it seemed like it actually did a good job renaming, and then I realized that it didn't. And so basically, I think this is because it's a workspace project instead of just a single npm project as normal. Because I think the alias comes from the tsconfig, and I think it can't find which tsconfig to use or something. But this is a pretty simple fix. We're just going to do a manual search replace for we're going to look for @/components and then just replace it with @/tt/components. And I'm going to do that for I guess the components, the extensions, hooks, libs, and styles directories. And if I do that in the whole code base, hopefully everything will still be working. So I'm going to do that. Okay, now I have everything renamed and everything's working as far as I can tell. And one thing I want to point out, though, is that was a little more painful than it had to be, because I added an extra slash when I was doing the renaming, and then I had to then do it all over again without the slash. And yeah, I don't know what's going on with the renaming when you move stuff around. It seems like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but just in case, this is what you have to do. But now we have everything isolated within a single directory. So now what we want to do is just move this whole thing into another project, into the project we want to migrate it to. And then on top of that, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go in and copy the Tiptap dependencies so we can do an npm install. And the only thing we really want to be careful of is these if you might have some type of conflicts with the different Radix UI stuff, especially if you're using shadcn. And I think there might be some other things that are kind of going on with Tailwind, which you might want to be kind of aware of. But yeah, I think it would be easiest, I think, to just copy all the dependencies. But some of this stuff is specific to this project, to this Next.js project, and there's also font stuff. So you can always just trim away at it. I know this Cal Sans is that's a font thing, and also this iframe resizer, you don't need that. That has something to do with the the Tiptap. The example project is displayed in iframe somewhere, and this has something to do with communicating between when this page is rendered within an iframe or something like that. And so you definitely don't need that. But some of the stuff you do need, like Lowlight. This is the plugin that goes along with the code syntax extension. And so I guess what I should do now is set up a new project to move this into, just to show you how this all works. Now I'm going to create a Next.js app using the create T3 app script. And the reason I'm going to use this is because it has really tight Eslint and tsconfig rules, which are much stricter than the template code that we're going to copy in this TT directory. And so I want to show how you can continue using your own Eslint and tsconfig without having to modify your whole code base just to deal with this new directory that you're pulling in. And we do that just by modifying some files, and we're also going to have to manually enter some TS ignores on some files. All right, we now have the T3 app running. So all we have to do is copy over the TT directory, which has all the type code in it. And then also, just to get this rendering, let's go to the app route and just output the block editor component. And one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add the alias for the imports, which aren't the same in in this project. So this way we can import the like the @/tt components and all that stuff, which is used within the TT directory. And then within the page itself, I already changed this so that it's all it's rendering is the block editor. And one thing I noticed is we have to add this use client to this page, which is not something I had to do the last time because I was using page router. So I'm kind of learning as I go here. And now the next thing we need to do also is the we have to copy over the package JSON imports, or the package imports. So for the video, I think it's going to be easiest to just grab them all. But in practice, if you want to go through and remove the font stuff and, customize that to your own needs, then go ahead and do that. I'm just going to copy them all. And because this is just like an initial project, there's not going to be any, there's not going to be too many conflicts. You can just use your editor to make sure that you're not, it'll highlight what's the duplicate keys in your package JSON, so you can then choose which one you want to use. Like, I think it probably makes sense to use the T3 Next and React DOM versions. So I'm going to use those and then remove whatever I just copied in. Same thing with the Next version. So I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. And like on my other project with ShadCN, there was lots of radix version conflicts, or I guess not really conflicts, it's just duplicate imports. And so I just chose the later one in each case, and you can use the look at the versions and make sure that you're not like changing major versions, and then you might want to just be wary of that kind of thing. And remember, before you run npm install, that you have to copy in your npmrc because of the the protected npm packages. Alright, it's telling me that there is a parsing error and I have to basically lift some import statements from the from a CSS file to the top. So let's just do that and hope that we don't have to do much more other than this. I actually kind of think I remember doing this and I just forgot to write it down, so I think this is something you have to do on PageRouter also. Not entirely sure though. Oh wow, so there it is. So we've successfully imported this into this project. I'm not sure if the fonts actually work. Yeah, maybe not. Looks a little goofy. You might have to do some stuff with like the Tailwind font config if you want to, but I'm not really going to bother with that. And so we now have this fully imported. The only thing left to do now is, like, if you want to make sure that the this whole directory follows its own rules for ESLinting and different things like that. Like you can see here that we're getting lots of warnings and TypeScript stuff, and that's because the config, like I said, for the T3 app is really really strict. So I'll show you how to set that up also. And so to get it to use different ESLint rules from the TT directory, all you have to do is add the we're going to add a file called .eslintrc.cjs, which is just like a normal ESLint config file, but we're going to put it inside the TT directory. And we also have to tell TypeScript about it, so we're going to tell TypeScript to include it within the tsconfig. And then the file itself is basically the way you can build up the rules for this file is you can just keep running ESLint and let anything that it says is an error, you just disable it this way by setting the name of the rule and then off as the value. And then similarly with TypeScript, if you're getting TypeScript errors, you're just going to have to use tsignore statements at the top of the of whatever file it is, or you're going to have to fix the whatever the TypeScript issue is, because with ESLint you can have different rules per directory by just putting a .eslint file there, but with TypeScript you're really limited to just one tsconfig per directory. So you're either going to have to ignore it entirely within that file, or you're going to have to you're going to have to put the tsignore on the top of the file or fix it. And again, this is just an issue in case it's part of your CI or whatever, that you're running lint checks and strict type error checks. I think the NextJS config also gives you an option to like ignore build errors and type check errors and stuff. But so that's just like one thing I wanted to throw out there to be aware of. And so I think that'll give you a pretty good start. Once you have it in your project, like I think the next steps are kind of obvious. Like you want to mess with the CSS. Remember to remove that, like the max height of 100, and then mess around with the different paddings and things like that. One thing you have to be aware of is that the when you do mess with the padding, some of the locations of the tooltips and different pop-ups, that comes from the config for it's called like the tippy library. So sometimes you pass like some arguments there for how many pixels over you want it to for where you want it to render at, and you're going to have to change that if you mess with the padding on the internal element. And so you can mess with the CSS and things like that. And then obviously the next steps, you probably want to add like props to this block editor. So you want to pass it like its initial state, and also like a callback function for when the editor value changes. And that's just called on update. You would just pass it through to the useBlockEditor hook, adding more parameters as you go. And then it's just it's like an on update argument that gets passed to this useEditor hook. And then you just use editor.getJSON, or you can also get HTML. And it's all pretty obvious. And there's also one thing is that the documentation does have good examples. It's just they don't have one giant example. And so if there's any individual thing that you want to do, you can just check the documentation. So like one thing is if you want to set the editor to be read-only, one of the strange things is instead of passing like a prop for read-only is you have to use like the sort of imperative editor.commands or whatever. So the way that it's usually done in the documentation is through like a use effect that's listening to that variable. Although, there's obviously going to be other ways to do it since it's all done imperatively from the editor functions. And so I guess there were some other things I wanted to talk about. For the GitHub actions, again, I mentioned this earlier, so I thought I would point it out. If you want to, because you depend on the npmrc file to run npm install, one thing you can do is just echo the output of the file directly into the file as one of the steps in your GitHub action. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but I'm not sure if I did. Within a vercel for npmrc, you just create like an environment variable. It has like some special name, and then the value of that variable is the contents of the entire file. And that's how I did it and got it working for me. And some other things. One thing I noticed is when you render the editor within a form, the way that the buttons are set up currently is that they'll actually submit the form. So you'll go to the toolbar to change it to bold, and then it'll submit the form, which is completely annoying. But it's an easy fix. You just have to go into the components directory, and there's one component called button and one called like drop down button, and you just have to give it an attribute of type of button, and that prevents it from submitting the form. So that's one thing you actually need to do. And finally, I wanted to talk a bit about the page router because it's a little bit different. One thing is that with the styles import is you have to import that CSS at like the highest level in the React tree. I think that's how it works in NextJS. So you just take whatever that style import is within the I think it's the block editor component, and you just have to lift it up to like the app.jsx or whatever it is in NextJS, the top level component where you're allowed to render CSS. So that's one thing you need to be wary of. The other is with SSR. It's not going to let you render unless you set this immediately render to false. And basically what it does is, like, I think in the HTML that comes down, it's just like a placeholder, and then it's actually like on the first render, it'll then figure out what the output is and then put it in your into the HTML document. And I think for SEO, I'm not sure if it's still this way, but at least back in the day, I think it would have been preferred to actually have the markup within that first HTML response. And so one thing you can do is when you go to save the JSON data for the state of the editor for whatever form field this is, you can also save alongside of it the HTML, because the editor object has an editor.getHTML, and I think there's also a function called generateHTML that can be used in different contexts. Like I think generateHTML is what you're supposed to use if it's only being rendered on the server. But because the way I'm doing it is I'm just using editor.getHTML because I'm saving it from the front end. So then in your database, you just have a string of HTML that you can render. And then it just has like CSS classes on it. So if you then import the styles directly for the block editor on that same page, then it'll look exactly like the normal editor output. And there are a few exceptions to that, though, that I found, like with the code editor, like the syntax highlighting doesn't work exactly, and the same thing with the math markup. Like usually with SSR, with the math component, one of the big selling points of it is that it did like SSR, and so it would output like the special math markup or whatever. And so one thing that I found that you can do is you can use a library called, let's see what it's called, HTML React Parser. And basically what that allows you to do is it allows you to walk the HTML that you saved, like that little portion of HTML that you're going to render, and you can replace the different DOM nodes with React components. And so basically what you can do when you call, what you can do is you can add a special attribute to whatever the DOM node is at like for what you want to replace with an actual React component. And then within this, using this library, HTML React Parser, you can check if the node that you're currently looking at is the node that you want to replace, and then you just return whatever the React component is. So I did that to replace, so that I'm actually inlining like a math rendered thing instead of just the $sign. And you can also do the same thing with the code component if you just use whatever the the real underlying component that it's using. I think it's called like low light or something like that. And so using that gives you kind of all the tools you need to do SSR on the page router. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. If you guys like this video, subscribe and thumbs up or whatever. And if this video does well, I might do some follow-up videos on how to actually make extensions and even the lower level stuff, because I think that stuff's pretty cool. But one thing I have noticed, though, is that like the more technical the video is, like the less views and response it gets. And I think even the people that would like it and want to find it, like, aren't able to find it. So like, if you want me to make that video, just leave a comment and whatever. And thanks, and take it easy.